Tuesday, July 13th, 2021, and I am wondering if you've watched Summer of Soul, the new documentary produced by Questlove. I just saw it earlier this week, and it was great. And as I was preparing to go to the movie, I actually started to remember an exchange, a conversation that I had with my late father, Dan Chamberlin. My father was a lover of music. He loved the blues, jazz, R&B, soul. That's the kind of music that was playing in our house all the time. Professionally speaking, he was working in public relations in New York City. So he began his career there, in the 60s, and on it went. And I remember him telling me one day about this fabulous concert that went on in Harlem, New York City, that he worked on. We were living there at the time. It was 1969, so I would have been 6 years old. Of course, he was relaying this memory to me much later. I was already, probably in my late 20s, maybe early 30s. And how fabulous it was. He was like, the Temptations were there, Little Stevie Wonder, and how he had worked on it, because his client at the time was General Foods. Now, General Foods had a division, Maxwell House Coffee. So if you've seen this documentary, Summer of Love, you'll recall a reference to that in the movie, because they were supportive in getting the whole thing filmed. So my father said to me how disappointed he was that there had never been any follow-up promotion to the concert. In other words, all this film footage, had never been seen. Of course, now we find out in the summer of 2021 that it had been languishing in a basement somewhere, probably in a basement of a television studio somewhere. So I said, wait a minute, my dad wrote an essay about this experience, and I found it today, and I want to read it to you. I want to share with you a first-person account of Dan Chamberlin. This essay is entitled, What Happened to the Moonglow? Written in 1994. What does the 25th anniversary of the moon landing and the attendant warm puppy nostalgic glow have to do with racial harmony and understanding? On the surface, not very much. We often hear that most people remember where they were and what they were doing on historic occasions. When JFK was assassinated, the A-bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, VJ Day, and so on. According to the retrospective flood of articles and books that have appeared, some 500 million people around the world watched the moon landing on their TVs, which would certainly put it in the top 10 of modern events, at least from an awareness point of view. Several of these articles take a less euphoric view of the space feat than was current at the time. In fact, some are downright critical from the scientific accomplishment point of view. I certainly remember where I was. I was helping to coordinate a series of free concerts sponsored by then-client in Mount Morris Park in central Harlem. For those too young, or whose memories are dimmed by time, the 60s was a time of intense civil rights activity. It was also a time of great ambivalence, if not hostility, to the push by Black Americans, must I say African Americans, for broader participation in the oft-denied promises of the American dream. Corporate America reflected this ambivalence. Many companies paid pious lip service to the notion of greater equality. Many did nothing if they could get away with it. And some were intransigent in their opposition to what was called equal opportunity. To this day, I am not certain what prompted my client, the Maxwell House division of the General Foods Corporation, to sponsor the Harlem Cultural Festival, a series of 6 free concerts to be staged in Mount Morris Park in the heart of Harlem. I would like to think that it was a pure act of beneficence, but that's probably naive. Arrière-pensée aside, they did it. I can only guess at why I was chosen to be the front man for the company. I was, and am, white, although my love of jazz and Latin music was well known. Also, I was not an employee, so if, for some reason, deniability were necessary, I was certainly deniable. Of course, the promoters and about 95% of the talent that appeared were Black. And what talent! I can think of no other venue before or since where on a given Saturday you could see B.B. King, Gladys Knight and the Pips, David Ruffin and the Temptations, Little Stevie Wonder, the Staple Singers, Herbie Mann, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, the Edwin Hawkins Singers, Mahalia Jackson, and so many more, and all for free. As I recall, the performers donated their services or took only expenses. Over the years, I have become quite cynical about ostensible pro bono efforts by corporations, but the only commercial input by my client was a large cutout of the Maxwell House Coffee cup, period. Obviously, there was considerable trepidation on the part of many, both Black and white, about the advisability of putting on any kind of event like this in Harlem. What about security? What about riots? What about one-on-one street violence? Many of the client types safely cocooned in Westchester and Fairfield counties had deep misgivings about the whole exercise, and very few ever put in an appearance at the concerts. Even though it was not their baby. Credit should be given to Ogilvy and Mather, the advertising agency for Maxwell House. Even though it was not their baby, they were very supportive. Maybe there was a Moonglow effect abroad. There were never any incidents at any of the 6 concerts, despite police crowd estimates of an average of 250,000 attendees at the events. There were undoubtedly peripheral street arrests for usual petty crimes like pickpocketing, etc., but never an act of violence or disruption. I think one of the reasons for this was the rather clever idea of community involvement in security. Thus, in addition to New York's finest, local groups from allies of the Black Panthers to the Nation of Islam were enlisted and paid to keep an eye on things. It should be remembered that then, as today, the police force was overwhelmingly white, so having brothers as keepers of the peace went a long way toward muting any hostility that may have been felt about having a lot of men in blue with white faces in the park. As one of the very few white faces on a decidedly dark canvas, I cannot recall feeling threatened. I do recall being razzed on 1 or 2 occasions when I had to take the stage to make some kind of routine announcement. Yells of, "Get off the stage, honky, so we can hear some music." Didn't bother me very much because the tone was more jocular than threatening, and I was definitely not in the league of Stevie Wonder or Gladys Knight. On the day the moon landing was announced, the crowd gave a polite, if restrained, cheer, accompanied by a few audible boos. But the overall ambiance was cheerful. There was a hell of a concert in Mount Morris Park, and 3 white guys were clomping around on the moon. Hey, everything was cool. I thought it was all over on the day of the Mahalia Jackson gospel concert. For some unfathomable reason, the police detail assigned that day was the notorious TPF, Tactical Patrol Force. Police duty had been rotated among various regular precincts. Again, for those with short memories, the TPF was an elite group of the NYPD designed for deployment and use in riots and other types of violent civil disturbances. Basic qualifications were being at least 6 feet tall and weighing in at 195 pounds plus, and the mentality of a stormtrooper. As I watched the TV monitor in the staff trailer, I recall thinking that if anything was going to set off the crowd, the TPF presence would do the trick. But the Moonglow effect must have been making its way through space. For as the magnificent Mahalia Jackson was singing, "We Shall Overcome," the cameras were panning the audience. Incredibly, a vision of a black man and woman flanking a TPF cop filled the screen. And as Mahalia reached a stirring crescendo, the trio clasped hands and raised them over their heads. I know it's simplistic, naive, and Pollyannish to ask, but where has the Moonglow gone? 25 years after the moonwalk, Mahalia and Mount Morris Park, we are not only not holding hands, we are at each other's throats, figuratively and literally. Sad barely begins to describe it. Just as a man's live, broader explorations of space have stalled, so too has our exploration of the path to greater racial peace, harmony, and understanding. 1994. This was written by my father, Daniel Chamberlin, in 1994. So, of course, this begs the question, you need to go back in time in 1994 and remember what was going on then during in the United States, who was president and all of that. But I'm just so happy that I remembered this essay. I'm so happy that my father wrote this essay. I'm so glad that somehow or another he was there, that he was at this series of events. And, you know, my father walked the walk. He married my beautiful mother in 1960, right? So I guess that was maybe before the official start of the civil rights movement. They met, I think, in 1959. They got married about a year later. And my father always felt that, you know, the descriptions of a person's, you know, ethnicity was simply that. It was just a way to maybe identify someone to someone else if you were waiting for a friend or to meet someone, putting people together and they'd never seen each other before. But he never, ever thought that it was a defining quality of a person's character and of their humanity. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. If you haven't seen Summer of Soul, go see it. It is wonderful. I want to thank Questlove, this New Yorker, now living in California, wants to thank Questlove for bringing this vision to life of what my father was trying to convey to me, just with words. And here's hoping that all the concert footage will eventually be made available in DVD or streaming for the rest of us to see. And a shout out, of course, to the late, great Marvin Gaye for his song, Make Me Want to Holler, The Way They Do My Life, right? Have a wonderful evening, y'all. Thank you so much for being here. Namaste. Okay, now we've got to try and end this.